When you've spent most of your life beside someone, their absence doesn't just echo in the hallway. It settles into your body, your breath, your morning routine. I've sat with many people during that first year after losing a spouse, some as a hospice social worker, others simply as someone who's been there. Grief isn't a straight line. It doesn't come in clean stages or keep to a schedule. And that's what makes decision-making after a loss so delicate. In those first few weeks or months, many of the choices we're faced with feel urgent, but very few actually are. I've watched people try to organize everything right away, as if action could somehow bring order to the chaos inside. I understand that impulse, truly, but acting too quickly without space to process often leads to decisions that carry long-term regret. Not because people aren't smart or capable, but because they're hurting, and hurt clouds clarity. One of the most common patterns I've seen is the need to do something big right away. Sell the house, change the will, move across the country to be closer to the kids. It's an attempt to escape the ache, to make something move when everything else feels frozen. A woman named Clara, who was 73 when her husband passed, told me something I never forgot. "I didn't know what to do with all the silence," she said, "so I filled it with action." Clara sold her home within 6 weeks, the one she and John had lived in for 38 years. It was a tidy house on a quiet street. She told herself it was too big for one person, that the garden was too much. But really, she just couldn't bear seeing his coffee mug still in the sink each morning. 3 months later, in a new city, she called me. "I don't know who I am here," she said. "I don't even recognize the sound of the birds." That kind of dislocation doesn't just come from geography. It comes from making a permanent decision during a temporary storm. The advice I find myself giving again and again, both professionally and personally, is simple but hard to follow. Wait. If you can, wait at least a year before making any major financial or lifestyle changes. That's not a rigid rule, just a gentle marker. Enough time for the fog of grief to thin just a little. Enough time for the silence to soften into space. I once sat with a hospice nurse named Daniel who said it beautifully. Grief changes shape. You think you know what you feel in the beginning, but give it 6 months, and that shape shifts. So don't carve your future in stone while your heart is still moving. Of course, there are situations where change is necessary: financial strain, health issues, caregiving demands. But even then, the best path forward often involves a trusted advisor, a conversation, a pause. And it's not just about houses and money. Another costly decision I see often is people withdrawing entirely from their social world. Not intentionally. It usually starts with 1 or 2 declined invitations, a skipped phone call, a family dinner you don't feel up for. That's okay. Truly, rest is part of grief. But over time, that quiet can become isolation. And isolation grows roots. When George lost his wife at 77, he told me he just didn't feel like talking to anyone. "What's there to say?" he asked me. "She's gone." So he stopped showing up to the community center, where he used to play chess every Thursday. He let his church group meetings slide. He avoided his daughter's calls, not out of anger, but because he felt too raw. It wasn't until nearly 8 months later, when a friend showed up unannounced with a deck of cards and 2 sandwiches, that George cracked a smile again. "It was strange," he said later. "I forgot what it was like to laugh out loud." Grief tells us we're safer alone, that no one could understand, that being around others will only make us feel more empty. But in truth, gentle connection, low pressure, no expectations, is often the lifeline we didn't know we needed. I always suggest this: don't aim for big social events. Start with one cup of tea, 1 walk around the block with a neighbor, 1 voicemail returned. Let connection be slow and soft. And if you're someone watching a parent or friend go through this, your quiet persistence matters more than you realize. Don't push. Don't fix. Just be there. Drop off soup. Sit in silence. Leave the porch light on. The presence of care, even without conversation, reminds people they're not as alone as their pain tells them. When decisions are made from loneliness, they often carry the weight of trying to fill a space that isn't meant to be filled, but carried. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. After a loss, there's often a space people are desperate to fill. Not just the empty side of the bed or the quiet kitchen in the morning, but something deeper. A vacancy inside the chest. A kind of floating that feels untethered. For some, the instinct is to reach for companionship right away. For others, it's to give, to pour out love to children, to friends, to charities, sometimes even strangers. I've seen both responses. Both come from the same place, the ache of disconnection. I remember speaking with a woman named Eileen. She was 69 when her husband passed after a long illness. Within 2 months, she had started seeing someone new. I just needed someone to talk to, she said. Someone who didn't look at me with pity, who didn't bring casseroles and sad eyes. I didn't judge her. Grief doesn't come with a rule book. And sometimes, yes, a connection can offer comfort. But 6 months later, Eileen called again. I think I mistook relief for readiness, she whispered. That line stayed with me. Grief is heavy. And sometimes, when someone enters your life who makes you smile again, even briefly, it feels like salvation. But early companionship, especially romantic, is often built not on shared foundations, but on shared absence. And that's dangerous, because what starts out feeling like a bomb can, in time, become a source of conflict, guilt, or confusion, especially if the person grieving hasn't had time to really sit with who they are now. The version of themselves that's different, not broken, not incomplete, but changed. There's also this undercurrent of pressure, especially for seniors, to move on gracefully. People don't say it outright, but there are nods, questions. Have you thought about dating again? Or you're still young in spirit? I understand the good intentions behind those words, but I've also seen how they push people into relationships before they're truly ready. A therapist I worked with once told me, after deep loss, we're like wet cement, still forming, still soft. If someone steps in too early, they leave a shape you might not want to keep. That's not to say don't seek connection, but let it come from strength, not desperation. Ask yourself, am I drawn to this person for who they are, or because they distract me from what I don't want to feel? That question takes courage, because sometimes we don't like the answer. On the other end of the spectrum, I've met people who give away their time, their energy, and even their money far too quickly. Guilt can be a powerful motivator. Guilt that you're still here. Guilt that your spouse didn't get more years. Guilt that you didn't do enough. So you give. You buy things for your grandchildren. You donate in your spouse's name. You write large checks to causes they cared about. And all of that can be beautiful if it comes from clarity. But when it comes from unresolved sorrow, it can become dangerous. I once worked with a financial counselor who shared the story of Harold. He was 75 when his wife passed. They had always talked about giving a portion of their estate to a local animal shelter. A good cause. One they both cared about. But within 2 months of her death, Harold gave away nearly $80,000, without consulting his kids, without updating his will, without speaking to a professional. When asked why, he simply said, "It felt like the only thing I could still control." I wish someone had reminded him that honoring her didn't have to be rushed, that you can take time to plan, that legacy isn't built in haste. It's built in quiet, thoughtful steps. We often think that doing something, anything, is better than standing still. But sometimes, stillness is where the truest healing begins. That's what I found with so many older adults. Their first instinct is action, but what they need deeply is permission. Permission to rest, to feel, to not fix the ache, but to hold it. Holding isn't the same as suffering. It's acknowledging that love, when lost, leaves a shape behind, and that shape deserves attention before we try to fill it. Here's something you can say to yourself when you feel the urge to make a big decision. I'm allowed to wait. I'm allowed to feel uncertain. I don't owe anyone quick answers. That simple phrase has stopped more than one person from making a choice they couldn't take back. If you're the child of someone grieving or a friend or caregiver, don't rush them into decisions. Don't use words like closure. Instead, ask, what do you need today? Or even better, would it help to just sit for a while? We don't have to solve the sadness. We just have to respect it. That kind of respect creates space. And in that space, clarity eventually arrives. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. One of the quietest mistakes I've seen, and perhaps the most dangerous, is the way grief makes people stop caring for their own health. Not intentionally, not out of neglect, but because when your world has been turned inside out, brushing your teeth or fixing breakfast feels meaningless. I've walked through the homes of many seniors who lost their spouse recently, and the pattern is often the same. The fridge is half empty, the medication tray untouched, appointments missed. A favorite chair now becomes the only place they sit for hours, sometimes days. When someone loses the person they used to share daily life with, even the smallest routines start to collapse. There's no one to remind you to drink water. No one to say, "Did you take your pills?" Or, "Let's go for a walk today." I remember a man named Lewis. He was 81 when his wife passed. A quiet, kind soul, sharp mind, a gentle voice. He'd been managing diabetes for years, quite responsibly. But 3 months after her passing, he was admitted to the hospital with dangerously low blood sugar. He told the nurse, "I just didn't feel like cooking anymore." Cooking, to him, had always been about care. It was something he did for her. Without her at the table, the act lost its meaning. So he stopped eating properly. No one told him he was making a decision. But that's the truth about grief. It doesn't always show up in grand gestures. Sometimes it whispers in neglect. I've come to believe this. Grief doesn't just break your heart. It weakens your body. And if you don't tend to that body, slowly and gently, the effects become layered: fatigue, confusion, compromised immunity. That's why it's vital, not just helpful but vital, to keep a baseline of self-care, even in sorrow. Not because you have to bounce back. Not because life goes on, but because you're still here, and your presence still matters. There's a hospice nurse I worked with for years. Her name is Margaret. One afternoon, she said something I carry with me to this day. After someone dies, the one left behind often forgets that they are still a patient too. That struck me deeply, because so many of the people I've cared for weren't just grieving a loved one. They were grieving themselves. The version of themselves that was well, that had energy, that laughed, that felt like they had a reason to take their vitamins. So here's what I often suggest gently: keep a glass of water beside your bed. Even if you don't feel thirsty, leave notes to yourself on the fridge. Eat something today. If a friend offers to take you to the doctor, say yes. Not because it's urgent, but because routine matters. Don't cancel checkups just because. Even grief needs medical support. And most importantly, don't confuse pain with punishment. You don't have to prove how much you miss someone by how little you care for yourself. Taking care of your body, your sleep, your breath, your movement is not betrayal. It's continuation. I met Helen, a widow in her early 70s, who struggled with guilt every time she laughed. She once said, "It felt wrong to feel joy in a world he wasn't in anymore." So she stopped joining friends for lunch. She turned down a weekend trip with her church group. She spent most days alone, curled up with old photographs. But when she finally agreed to walk with her neighbor around the block, just a simple 20-minute stroll, something shifted. "I didn't feel happy," she said, "but I felt alive. And sometimes that's enough." Movement is medicine, not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in the subtle, steady rhythm that reminds your body, you're still in this life, one foot in front of the other, even on the hard days. I've also seen how grief affects sleep. People either can't sleep at all or they sleep too much. Dreams become strange, even disturbing. Nights feel longer, quieter. The person who used to say good night is no longer there. If this is happening to you or someone you care for, know that it's common. And it's treatable. A short conversation with a doctor, a mild sleep aid, a warm routine like tea or gentle music before bed. These small interventions help more than most people expect. And when it comes to mental health, I'll say this plainly. There is no shame in asking for help. None. Whether it's therapy, a support group, or just sitting down with someone who will listen without trying to fix you. These acts are not signs of weakness. They are expressions of strength. I've seen people blossom in grief, Not because the pain went away, but because they finally allowed its space to be seen. They cried. They told stories. They allowed others in. They gave language to their sorrow. And in doing so, they found a soft kind of power. It didn't erase the loss, but it held the weight differently. So if you find yourself saying things like, "I'm fine," when you're not, consider replacing it with, "I'm managing, but today is hard." That one sentence can open a door. You are not a burden for needing care. You are a person who has endured a profound loss. And you deserve gentleness. From others. From yourself. Some of the most difficult decisions after loss aren't really decisions at all. They're moments. Small ones. Standing in the hallway, looking at a closed closet door. Opening a drawer and finding a note in their handwriting. Folding laundry and realizing it no longer includes their shirts. What do you do with it all? This is the question I've been asked most often by people in grief. Not in those exact words, but in the tremble of their voice when they say, "I don't know where to start." And honestly, I never give a quick answer, because there isn't one. I once sat with a woman named Ruth. She was 76. Her husband had passed nearly 2 years before. His slippers were still by the bed. His toothbrush still in the holder. His side of the closet, untouched. "I know it's silly," she whispered, "but I talk to his coat every morning." It wasn't silly. It was love. But love, when frozen in place too long, becomes weight. Ruth told me she kept everything the same because she didn't want to feel like she was moving on. "If I start packing things away," she said, "I'm afraid it means I've accepted he's not coming back." That's the quiet bargain we make with grief, isn't it? If I just leave things untouched, maybe time won't keep pushing forward. But time moves whether we participate or not. And holding on too tightly to objects, especially all of them, can sometimes prevent us from holding what truly matters. The memory, the meaning, the essence of the person we've lost. There's no rule book for when or how to let go of belongings. But here's what I've learned. Through years of working with families and elders, you don't have to keep everything to keep someone close. Let me say that again. You don't have to keep everything to keep someone close. The physical reminders, the clothes, the mugs, the books, can be comforting at first. But eventually, they can create a kind of shrine, not to the life you shared, but to the pain of their absence. I met a man named Walter in his early 80s. He hadn't touched his wife's sewing room in almost 5 years. Everything was exactly as she left it. A half-finished quilt still draped over the chair. Buttons and threads in tidy rows. When we finally walked into that room together, he stood in silence for a long time. Then he whispered, "I kept it frozen, because I was afraid the memories would melt away." We sat on the floor that afternoon, sorting buttons together. He picked 3 spools of thread to keep, a pair of scissors, one of her scarves. The rest, he donated to a quilting group at the community center. "It's going where her hands would have wanted it," he said. And he cried, not out of regret, but relief. Because letting go, when done gently and in your own time, can feel like breathing again. That's the key, really, in your own time. There's no shame in taking a year, or 2, or more. But if you've been waiting out of guilt, if the fear of disrespecting their memory is the only thing holding you back, then it might be time to ask a new question. What would they want from me now? Most people, when asked, say this. They'd want me to keep living, to feel peace again. And peace doesn't live in closets. It lives in how you carry their memory forward. Here's what I often suggest to the families I've worked with. Start with one small box, one drawer, one corner of one room. Pick up each item and ask, does this hold comfort, or does it hold me back? Keep what feels warm. Let go of what feels heavy. You might find it helpful to create something new. A memory box, a scrapbook, a quilt made from their clothes. Something that gathers the love without scattering your sense of self. One daughter told me she turned her father's favorite flannel shirts into teddy bears for her grandchildren. Now they hug him, she said, without even knowing it. Others write letters before letting things go. Some take photos of rooms before they're changed, as a way to honor what once was. These rituals aren't about moving on. They're about moving with the grief instead of being stuck under it. And if friends or family are pressuring you to clean out too soon, it's okay to say, I'll do it when I'm ready, but I won't do it from fear. Fear-based decisions rarely bring peace, but love-based ones do, even if they come slowly. I've watched people reclaim their homes, little by little. The guest room becomes a space for art. The kitchen table holds new recipes. The garden, once overgrown, blooms again. Not in spite of the one they lost, but because of them. Because love that deep doesn't end. It expands. It shifts. It asks to be lived through you in new ways. So if you're staring at a closet or a chair or a pair of shoes and wondering what to do, start with breath. You don't need to decide everything today. Just ask, what would bring light into this space again? And let that guide you. The hardest part of loss isn't always the first few weeks. Sometimes it's what comes after. The silence that lingers even when the casseroles stop arriving. The calendar that no longer holds anniversaries to celebrate, but dates you try to forget. The way the world seems to carry on. Cars honking, neighbors mowing lawns, while inside, your reality has been cracked open. And in that space, it's tempting to try to redefine everything. Who you are now, what your life should look like, where you should go from here. But here's something I've seen again and again. Trying to rebuild your identity too quickly after loss can lead you further away from yourself, not closer. Because grief doesn't erase you, it reveals you. The question isn't, who am I now that they're gone? It's, who am I still? I've seen people take on entire projects in an effort to outrun that question. They throw themselves into volunteering or remodeling the house or taking care of everyone else around them. And while all of that can be meaningful, if it's driven by avoidance, it becomes exhausting. There's a man I used to work with, Jim, 78, a retired engineer. After his wife passed, he enrolled in 2 senior classes, joined a hiking group, and started baking for the neighborhood kids. He smiled through all of it. But one day, sitting in his garage, he said to me, I'm doing all this, but I haven't sat still long enough to cry. I put a hand on his shoulder and simply said, then maybe that's where your next chapter starts. Stillness isn't the enemy. It's the soil. The soil where new things grow quietly and at their own pace. In a culture that idolizes action, it takes courage to pause, to say, I'm not rushing to be okay. I'm not measuring my worth by how productive I am. I'm allowing space for the grief, for the love, and eventually, for something new. And when that something new comes, it might be small at first. A new recipe, a walk at a different time of day, the sound of your own laughter catching you off guard, the decision to sit in the garden and just be, without needing to name what you're becoming. That's not a lack of progress. That is progress. I often tell people, grief doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to bring your whole self forward, with the loss woven in, not left behind. Because healing isn't a doorway you walk through. It's a weaving, a layering, a long, slow restitching of meaning into your days. And the wisest decisions after loss, the ones that truly shape a life, aren't the big ones. Not the moves, not the estate changes, not even the new hobbies. They're the small, repeated ones, saying no to what drains you, saying yes to what steadies you, letting others in even if it's awkward, giving yourself grace when the tears still come, allowing joy without guilt. One hospice therapist told me, most of the people I see aren't asking how to forget, they're asking how to live with memory. And that's the real question, isn't it? How do I live now in a way that honors what was without being trapped in it? You won't find that answer in a checklist, but you might find it in the way you make tea again and sit where you used to sit together. You might find it in the letter you write but never send. You might find it in your own hands, tending, folding, steadying a life that still has shape. I don't believe there's a single right way to move through loss. Only thoughtful ways, honest ways, and ways that begin with patience. So if you've watched this far, perhaps you're facing one of those decisions now. Or maybe you're walking beside someone who is. Either way, I hope you'll remember, you don't have to rush. You don't have to rebuild quickly. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not even to yourself. Let each step come when it's ready. Let your days be spacious enough to feel both the ache and the quiet return of something lighter. And if this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,